Hi everyone, hope you are all preparing for your June 2024 examination. So in this video, we will be dealing with certain questions, certain mock tests that would help you to prepare for your examination. So in this particular video, we will be dealing with 25 questions and these 25 questions are taken from poetry. So here, one thing that you have to have in your mind before dealing with the questions is that, as we all know, when NTA revised the syllabus in December 2018, they have introduced this generic divisions of these writers or their works like poetry, fiction and short stories, drama, non-fiction. So here, before that, we were studying from British literature, American literature, post-colonial literature, European literature. Even now, it is easy for us to learn from these nationalities because it would give us a clear-cut idea about the chronological order. It will give us a whole sense of literature as a whole. But still, after all these dealing with nationalities, it is really essential for us to revise in this generic way or according to this generic division for us to brush up all these writers and all these works. So that is what we are going to do in this particular video. So here we will be giving you these 25 questions which will brush up your ideas or brush up your already learned poems. And another thing that I want you to have in this mind is that these are 25 more questions which I want you to study further, okay, because all the options that I have given here, the questions, all are important under NTA NET examination, for NTA NET examination. So it is really essential for you to learn or you to further elaborate on these questions. So now let's look at these questions in general. So the first question: who is known as the father of metaphysical poetry in English? Who is known as the father of metaphysical poetry in English? The options are John Donne, Andrew Marvell, Joe Chapman and Philip Sidney. John Donne, Andrew Marvell, Joe Chapman and Philip Sidney. So here the question is, before moving to this answer, you have to remember that metaphysical poets and metaphysical criticism is actually very much important for UGC NET examination, because if you look at the previous year questions, you can find numerous number of questions from metaphysical poets, about metaphysical poetry in general, about the critics who have mentioned about metaphysical poetry like T.S. Eliot, Samuel Johnson, John Dryden, etc. So metaphysical poetry is actually a very significant category or a very important area of concern for NTA UGC NET examination. So who is known as the father of metaphysical poetry in English? The correct answer is John Donne. So John Donne is considered to be the father of metaphysical poetry in English due to his influential role in developing and popularizing the metaphysical style. So all these writers like Andrew Marvell, Abraham Cowley, all these writers comes under John Donne. So metaphysical poetry, it is indicated or it is characterized by the features like wit, wordplay, intellectual, or the mixing up of emotions and intellect. So John Donne's poetry, it stands out for its use of conceits, and conceits are one important feature of metaphysical poetry. And we knew what a conceit is. They are extended metaphors that draw surprising connections between what can we say, seemingly unrelated things like love and compass or love and gold. Okay, so here you can find that they are connecting intellect with emotion. That is what we call as conceit. So if you look at John Donne's work, his work often features a blend of emotion and intellect, or you can find a combination of philosophical reflections with personal experience. So John Donne is considered the father of metaphysical poetry in English due to his influential role in developing and popularizing the metaphysical style. So his work is characterized by intricate wordplay, intellectual wit, the complex ideas often concerning love, religion and philosophy. So who is called as the father of metaphysical poetry? The correct answer is John Donne. Moving on to the next question. Who is called as the Lady of Christ in Cambridge? Who is called as the Lady of Christ in Cambridge? So, Lady of Christ is actually a nickname given to John Milton. So, here the options are John Donne, Samuel Johnson, John Milton, and Alexander Pope. I think this was a question that was asked for one exam under UGC NET examination. So, here the correct answer is John Donne. Before explaining this question, remember that John Milton is also a very important writer when it comes to NTA NET examination or UGC NET examination, because you can expect one or two questions from John Milton from any of his work. It can be El Penicero, works in general, El Penicero or El Alighiero or Samson Agonistes, Paradise Lost. You can expect a question from Paradise Lost. There was multiple questions asked from Paradise Lost if you look at previous year question paper. And also Milton, his non-fiction works, etc. And anyway, Milton, non-fiction works like Areopagitica. So anyway, the correct answer is John Milton. Milton, he attended the Christ College from 1625 to 1632. It was in Christ College that he did his Bachelor of Arts and Master of Arts. So his physical features and his refined manners, it stood out in an environment that was often dominated by robust and masculine behaviors. So this contrast led his peers to bestow the somewhat teasing but also affectionate nick now, the Lady of Christ. So he has got long hairs. His features was feminine according to that time style. So John Milton was known by this nickname during his time at Christ College, Cambridge, due to his good looks and delicate features, which earned him the moniker the Lady of Christ. Now let's look at the next question. My heart aches and a drowsy numbness pains. My sense as though of hemlock I had drunk or emptied some dull opiate to the drains. 1 minute passed and Lethwards had sung. These are the opening lines of Ode to a Nightingale, to the Skylark, Ode on a Melancholy, Ode on Indolence. So when we discuss poetry, you have to keep in your mind that there are certain works, both in poetry and also in fiction, where you have to remember the important opening lines and also the concluding lines. Okay, it is applicable for both poetry and fiction, the opening lines and concluding lines. So here, my heart aches and a drowsy numbness pains. My sense as though of hemlock I had drunk or emptied some dull opiate to the drains. 1 minute passed and Lethwards had sung. These are the opening lines of. So all the odes given here are important. You have to go through it and just look at the opening lines of all these odes. Anyway, here the correct answer is Ode to a Nightingale. So Ode to a Nightingale, it was written in 1819, which was a period of great creativity for Keats and also for Shelley. So it was a time where he wrote many of his major odes. So the poem, it starts with the speaker describing a profound sense of physical and emotional numbness, as if he had consumed from this hemlock or opiate. So here, this numbness, it sharply contrasts with the vibrant, ecstatic song of the nightingale that the speaker hears. So here, the contrast is between the mortal speaker and the immortal sound of the nightingale. So here, if you look at the lines again, my heart aches and a drowsy numbness pains. My sense as though of hemlock I had drunk. So here the speaker, he feels a very deep, almost physical ache in his heart, which is accompanied by a sense of numbness that affects his senses. So he might be speaking about a writer's block, and this numbness, it actually creates a tone of melancholy throughout this poem. So he feels like it is as if he has drunk from hemlock, or he has emptied some dull opiate to the drawn. So here he and what can we say? He is actually suggesting a desire to escape reality or dull his pain. Okay, so that is what this poem, the opening line, says about. So moving to the next question, which among the following poems of Coleridge discusses his childhood experience in a negative manner and emphasizes the need to be raised in the countryside? Which among the following poems of Coleridge discusses his childhood experience in a negative manner and emphasizes the need to be raised in a countryside? So the options are Fears in Solitude, reflections on having left a place of retirement, this lime tree bore my prison, frost at midnight. Okay, fears in solitude, reflections on having left a place of retirement, this lime tree bore my prison, frost at midnight. So the question is about which poem. Okay, when we study poetry, you have to remember both romantic poetry and Victorian poetry. Both these writers, you have to study their major works and also the minor works. And when it comes to romantic poetry, Wordsworth is important, Coleridge, Shelley, Keats, Byron, all these writers are important. But Wordsworth and Coleridge, you can expect questions from anywhere, from any of their poems. Here, the correct answer is Frost at Midnight. Okay, so here the question is, in which of the poem does Coleridge laments over his childhood and wants his son to be grown up or once brought up in a very rural atmosphere? So the correct answer is Frost at Midnight. So Frost at Midnight, it is a reflective poem in which Coleridge meditates on his own childhood and expresses his desire for his son to grow up in a natural beauty of the countryside. So here the emphasis is given on countryside. So he contrasts his own urban upbringing with the ideal of a rural childhood, believing that being raised close to nature is essential for a fulfilling and imaginative life. And it is also a meditation on nature. Okay, because he describes the serene, a frosty night, the quietness of his surrounding, which creates a contemplative mood. So Coleridge, he reflects on his own childhood, which he spent in the city away from the nurturing influence of nature. So he describes feeling lonely and disconnected from the natural world because of that upbringing, which he never wanted to be a part of his son's growing. Okay, so that is about this poem, Frost at Midnight. Now, moving to the fifth question. You do not do anymore, black shoe in which I have lived like a food. For 30 years poor and white, barely daring to breathe or achew. These lines are taken from. So actually this is actually a very easy question, because if you know just the meaning of this poem, you can relate with the poet. So you do not do anymore, black shoe in which I have lived like a food for 30 years poor and white, barely daring to breathe or achew. So this is about a fear of someone, even the fear of breathe, even the fear of sneeze, and all these fear points to the Sylvia Plath's Daddy poems. So here the correct answer is option D, Daddy. So speaking about Daddy, Daddy is actually a poem by Sylvia Plath which was written in 1962. It is one of her most controversial poem in which she addresses the issues of this daddy issues, because it's also known for its emotional power and vivid imagery, where she compares her father with a Nazi regime, and the problems of Holocaust or the suffocation of Holocaust is compared with her on suffering. So the poem addresses the themes of oppression, identity, the speaker's complex relationship with her father. So the major theme of the Daddy poem is father-daughter relationship. Okay, father-daughter relationship, because here the poem, it explores the speaker's feelings towards her deceased father, whom she both idealizes at the same time also resents. Okay, so here you can, if you read the poem, you can find an imagery of confinement. Okay, so here you can find in this poem, there is this line, any more black shoe. The poem, the term, this black shoe, it represents the oppressive presence of her father, in which how much she is unhappy with her father or how much controlling her father is, where she, here again in this poem, she says, which I have lived like a food. Live like a food means she has been confined. Okay, this confinement has stifled her growth and freedom. So that is what she describes in this poem, this Daddy. And as I said earlier, this is one of the most important and controversial poem because of the emotional intensity. Okay, because in this poem she used a very stark visceral language to convey the deep emotional turmoil and the anchor that that the speaker feels while she was growing up as a fee towards her father. So in Daddy, she uses both bold at the same time shocking imagery to describe her feelings of entrapment and suffocation due to her father's overwhelming influence. So again, the correct answer is Daddy, and Daddy by Sylvia Plath is also an important poem when it comes to NDA NET examination. Moving to next question, from which poem has the lines ignorance is bliss and its folly to be wise taken from? From which poem has the lines ignorance is bliss and its folly to be wise taken from? So we have these options: Ode to a Distant Prospect of Eton College, Elegy Written in a Country Churchyard, Ode on the Spring, Ode on the Death of a Favorite Cat Drowned in a Tub of Goldfishes. So here I have given this options based on based on this, if you are all the options, the poems are also very important. So if you are taking this question and preparing for yourself, just try to grab information regarding all the other poems. So from which poem has the lines ignorance is a bliss and its folly to be wise taken from? So both these lines are very important. So the correct answer is Ode to a Distant Prospect of Eton College by Thomas Gray. So that is the correct answer. So about Ode to a Distant Prospect of Eton College, it's actually a poem written by Thomas Gray in 1747, and he's also the Elegy Written in a Country Churchyard is also a very important poem. So the poem, it reflects on the innocence and carefree nature of the youth, juxtaposed with these inevitable hardships and sufferings of this adult life. So one of the major poem that one of the major topic that is discussed, or the major theme that this poem revolves around, is a reflection on youth. Okay, so here Gray, he studied in this Eton College, so he nostalgically reminisces about the carefree days of childhood spent at this Eton College, where the boys are unaware about the challenges that lie ahead of them. So that is the reflection Ode to a Distant Prospect of Eton College. And similarly, there are many important lines in this poem, like where ignorance is a bliss, it's folly to be wise. It actually encapsulates the idea that not knowing about future hardship can make one happier. Okay, it's folly to be wise, where ignorance is a bliss. So it suggests that ignorance can sometimes be preferable to the harsh truths of life. So he nostalgically remembers about his youthful days at Eton College. So that is about Ode to a Distant Prospect of Eton College, a poem written by Thomas Gray, written in 1747. Moving to the next question, Prometheus Unbound essay. Prometheus Unbound essay. The options are prose treatise, verse drama, ode, ballad. Prose treatise, verse drama, ode and ballad. This is actually an important question. I'm not speaking about this question in particular, this types of question, because as I said earlier, since you are expected to be asked from this generic divisions, you can expect such questions. For example, if it is a prose, you can expect a novel to be given, and you have to identify whether it's a Bildungsroman, Kunstlerroman, Roman de Clough, so whatever it be. So such types of questions can be expected under this syllabus. So Prometheus Unbound essay, the options are prose treatise, verse drama, ode and ballad. Prose treatise, verse drama, ode and ballad. So the correct answer is Prometheus Unbound is a verse drama. Okay, so here Prometheus Unbound is a verse drama written by Percy Bysshe Shelley, first published in 1820, and it is regarded to be one of the major works written by Shelley, which is known for its lyrical qualities and lyrical and imaginative qualities. So speaking about this verse drama, the drama is a lyrical and philosophical reimagining of the ancient Greek myth of Prometheus. So Prometheus is known to be the god who defies the god to bring fire and knowledge towards humanity. So he's like a godlike figure for the humans, while a villain-like figure for the gods. So in Shelley's version, Prometheus is actually a symbol of resistance. Okay, he's actually a symbol of resistance against this tyranny, and he is the one who champions the human progress and enlightenment. Okay, so that is what you can find as a theme in Shelley's Prometheus Unbound. And it's also the play, it explores the themes of rebellion, freedom, human spirit, then the potential of social and personal transformation. It also dwells into the three themes of suffering and redemption. So Shelley's Prometheus Unbound, it is actually celebrated for its philosophical insights and also its poetical beauty. So that is the verse drama Prometheus Unbound, written by Shelley. Now moving on to the next question number 8. Pauline, a fragment of a confession is written by. Pauline, a fragment of a confession is written by. We have given the options: Lord Tennyson, P.B. Shelley, Robert Browning, D.G. Rossetti. Lord Tennyson, P.B. Shelley, Robert Browning and D.G. Rossetti. So the correct answer is Robert Browning. Okay, so Pauline, a fragment of a confession is written by Robert Browning. So speaking about this poem in particular, Pauline, it was written in 1832 and was published in 1833. It is actually a confession of an unnamed poet to his lover, the eponymous woman, or that is Pauline. So here what is important is that you can expect this as a match the following question, or you can expect as a direct question like who is the author of Pauline, or you can also expect to chronologically arrange the poems. Then you can expect a question on the subtitle. So Robert Browning, Robert Browning, Lord Tennyson, all these writers are really important when it comes to poetry. So Pauline, a fragment of a confession, is written by Robert Browning. So moving on to the next question. From where does Milton takes the name Lycidas for Edward King? From where does Milton takes the name Lycidas for Edward King? So we have the options: Horace, Theocritus, Prometheus and Apollonius. So the correct answer is Theocritus. Okay, so John Milton's use of the name Lycidas for Edward King in the poem Lycidas is a reference to Theocritus. So Theocritus is a Greek poet who is known for his pastoral poetry. Okay, you have to remember that Theocritus, he is known for his pastoral poetry. He is a Greek poet. So in this particular work, in Theocritus' work, Lycidas is a shepherd who laments the death of another shepherd named Daphne. So that is where Milton takes the term Lycidas. So if you speak about the literary allusion, by referencing Theocritus, Milton connects his work to a long tradition of pastoral poetry. Okay, and also he tries to bring a little depth and complexity to Lycidas by placing it within a broader literary context. So he doesn't want it to be too modern. He doesn't want it to be having a contemporary significance. He wanted to bring this classicism towards his poem. So that is one literary allusion. At the same time, you can also find that Theocritus Lycidas is also an elegy. So Milton uses this particular elegy as an example, because in Theocritus Lycidas is also a poem mourning the death of someone, often and it discusses the theme of loss, grief, reflection, etc. So here you can find that Milton also adopts the themes of this elegy or elegic tradition to mourn the untimely death of his friend Edward the King. Similarly, as I said earlier, it is also a pastoral poetry. So in pastoral poetry, shepherds are often these symbolic figures who represent simplicity or who represent innocence and the natural world. So by using the name Lycidas, Milton invokes this pastoral imagery, enhancing the elegy's emotional impact. And you can also find a mythological reference because it is associated with this Greek culture and mythology. So there would be layers and layers of meanings to Milton's elegy. So there is actually a very different layers of meanings towards this particular name Lycidas. Okay, so remember John Milton's use of the name Lycidas for Edward King in his poem Lycidas is a reference to Theocritus, a Greek poet known for his pastoral poetry. Now moving to the next question, who won the Nobel Prize for Literature in 1923? who won the Nobel Prize for Literature in 1923? So we have the options Ezra Pound, W.B. Yeats, T.S. Eliot and Rudyard Kipling. Ezra Pound, W.B. Yeats, T.S. Eliot and Rudyard Kipling. So the correct answer is W.B. Yeats. So it would be really difficult for you to study the year of all the Nobel Prize laureates and the names, but you have to remember some important names and the years. Okay, you can expect different types of questions, like there would be four authors where you would be asked to identify the person who has not won the Nobel Prize or who has won the Nobel Prize. Then you can and expect the questions like who won the Nobel Prize for Literature in this particular period, and who belongs to which nationality, who is the first person in that particular nationality to win the Nobel Prize. So you can expect such questions regarding this Nobel Prize. So Nobel Prize and the laureates, it's not something that you can avoid because there are a large number of people. You have to go through it and just figure out the major writers and the year of their winning. So who won the Nobel Prize for Literature in 1923? The correct answer is W.B. Yeats. W.B. Yeats won the Nobel Prize for Literature in 1923. So in December 1923, W.B. Yeats was awarded the Nobel Prize in Literature for his always inspired poetry, which in a highly artistic form gives expression to the spirit of the whole nation. So W.B. Yeats was given Nobel Prize for his contribution for his national poetry. So politically aware, we know that he knew the symbolic value of an Irish winner. So soon after Ireland has gained the independence. So W.B. Yeats or William Butler Yeats, he won the Nobel Prize for Literature in 1923. So he was the driving force behind the Irish literary revival, and along with the Lady Gregory founded the Abbey Theatre, serving as its chief during its early years. Okay, so when you study W.B. Yeats, look at his important poems, look at the year in which he won the Nobel Prize, and also look at the associated figures regarding about him. Associated figures in the sense associated with this Abbey Theatre and also nationalism. So that is W.B. Yeats, 1923. Moving on to the next question, the love song of J. Alfred Prufrock was first published in. The love song of J. Alfred Prufrock was first published in. This is actually important because this is the first published poem of T.S. Eliot. So, the love song of J. Alfred Prufrock was first published in option D, 1915. Okay, so you can find that the love song of J. Alfred Prufrock, it was commonly known as Prufrock, is the first professionally published poem by this American-born British poet T.S. Eliot. So, the poem, it relates the various thoughts of its title character in a stream of consciousness. So, you can also find the different types of expressions or the different types of modern avant-garde techniques in his poem, The Love Song of J. Alfred Prufrock, which actually reaches its extreme in The Wasteland, written by him. So, Eliot, he began writing Prufrock in February 1910 and it was first published in the June 1915 issue of Poetry, a magazine of verse which was helped to be published by Ezra Pound. So, more about this, The Love Song of J. Alfred Prufrock is, the poem structure, as I said earlier, it was heavily influenced by Eliot's aggressive reading of Dante's Allegory. So, Dante's Allegory was one of the most influence regarding this, the love song of J. Alfred Prufrock, and you can also find many references to Bible, the other works of William Shakespeare, Shakespeare's work including Henry IV Part 2, Twelfth Night, Hamlet, and then you can also find the influences of this metaphysical poets, Andrew Marvell, then the 19th century French symbolist writers. So, there are many intertextuality references when it comes to J. Alfred Prufrock. And also, speaking about this poem, T.S. Eliot, he narrates the experience of Prufrock in a stream of consciousness technique which was developed by his fellow modern writers. So, T.S. Eliot was actually a person who brought this stream of consciousness into poetry. And also, the poem, it is described as a drama of literary anguish, because it is regarded to be a dramatic interior monologue of an urban man who is stricken with feelings of isolation. So, that is basically one important thing regarding the love song of J. Alfred Prufrock. And also, you can find that if you study T.S. Eliot, J. Alfred Prufrock is important, his Wasteland is important, his critical works are important, like tradition and individual talent, the things he said about this metaphysical poets. T.S. Eliot is actually a very important person when it comes to NTA UGC NET English. So, moving to the next question, you have to identify the correct title. This question might appears to be a simple question, but it is actually quite confusing. And there was, I think it was in June 2023 examination, there was this question about the title of The Deserted Village by Oliver Goldsmith. So, the question was like, which among the following is the correct title of Goldsmith's poem? And the options were like The Deserted Village, A Deserted Village, The Deserted Villa. So, such types of questions regarding the title, it can be confusing. So, you have to have a clear-cut idea about the title. So, the options here are: lines composed a few miles above Tintern Abbey on visiting the banks of the Wye during a tour, July 20, 1798. Lines composed a few miles above Tintern Abbey on revisiting the banks of Wye during a tour, July 17, 1798. Lines composed a few miles above Tintern Abbey on revisiting the banks of Wye during a tour, June 13, 1798. Line composed a few miles above Tintern Abbey on revisiting the banks of Wye during a tour, July 13, 1798. So, the correct answer is July 13, 1798. That is, lines composed a few miles above Tintern Abbey on revisiting the banks of Wye during a tour. Okay, so that is the correct answer, option C. So, here let's look, the correct answer is lines composed a few miles above Tintern Abbey on revisiting the banks of Wye during a tour, July 13, 1798. And this poem is commonly known as Tintern Abbey. Both the poems are same. So, this poem, it was written in 1798, which was the beginning of this romantic period, a literary movement. We know about the features. The emphasis is given to imagination, emotion, nature, individual experience, and the poem is set along the banks of of River Wye near Tintern Abbey, a ruined medieval monastery in the Wales. So the thing is that Wordsworth, he had visited this location 5 times, 5 years earlier. So this is basically not a visiting, it is a revisiting for him, and he has visited this location 5 years earlier, and the poem, it reflects his return to the same spot, and the experiences that he has while sitting on the banks is entirely different, because now he is a matured man. At the time he was through his youth, so it evokes the memories, reflections on the passage of time. And if you read the poem, one of the major theme that is discussed here is nature. So here you can find that the poem, it celebrates the restorative power of nature. Here Wordsworth, he describes the tranquil beauty of beauty of the landscape or the wild seduced scene that brings him to a sense of peace and of spiritual renewal. And another thing is about the memory. So central to the poem is the theme of memory and the relationship that this memory had with the present. So Wordsworth, he reflects on how the memories of this place influenced his perception of the world or influenced his mental health. And this is also a poem about imagination. We know that the role of imagination and the role of imagination in interpreting or experiencing nature is one of the central theme in this romantic poems, which is also there in this Tintern Abbey. Then he also speaks about the elements of spirituality. And apart from that, speaking about this poem in general, this poem is written in blank verse using a very meditative and reflective tone. It consists of blank verse lines that flow very naturally, reflecting the tranquil or this meditative mood of the speaker. And also you can find that this poem is important when it comes to the mentioning of Dorothy Wordsworth, his sister. So that is also where you can expect a question. So that is about this poem. Lines composed a few miles above Tintern Abbey on revisiting the banks of Wye during a tour, July 13, 1798, or Tintern Abbey. Moving to the next question, how many lines are there in the wasteland? So such minute factual details regarding wasteland is important. How many lines are there? The first line, the last line, the 5 divisions of wasteland, similarly the year of publication, where it was published for the first time. All this is important regarding wasteland. So the question is, how many lines are there in the wasteland? And the correct answer is 434. So it's an epic poem. So with 434 lines. So the Wasteland is a poem by T.S. Eliot, published in 1922. Published in 1922. And how many lines are there? 434 lines. And it was first appeared in United Kingdom in the magazine The Criteria, and in US in the magazine The Dial. So remember that the Criteria, The Dial, 434, 1922, T.S. Eliot. And the other things, the first line, April is the cruelest month, which has got its reference to Chaucer's Canterbury Tales. Then another important phrases that you can expect from Wasteland is, I will show you fear in a handful of dust. These fragments I have showed against my ruins. And remember Wasteland, I will just give you a brief idea about Wasteland. The poem, it is divided into 5 sections. The first section, that is the burial of the dead. The first section is the burial of the dead, and in this you can find the themes of disillusionment, disillusionment or this fundamental emptiness of a life. And the second section, that is the the second section, that is the fire on the, so the first section, that is the burial of the dead. The second is a game of chess, which refers to Middleton's play, and it also employs an alternate narrations in, in several characters display the fundamental emptiness in their life. And the third one is fire of sermon, which actually refers to a sermon of Buddha, and therefore it is actually a philosophical meditation which regards to sexual dissatisfaction or self-denial. And the fourth one is the most shortest section in Wasteland, that is death by a water. It is about a description of a drowned merchant. And finally, what the thunder said, in which he gives references to this Hindu mythology and Hindu Upanishad. So it's a poem What the thunder said, it's a culmination of the poems previously exposed themes exported through the journey through a deserted, or the description through a deserted journey. So these are the 5 sections. So these are some of the important things that you have to remember regarding Wasteland: the year of publication, where it was published, how many lines are there, how many sections, and also just go through the different allusions and references in this particular work. Now let's move on to the next question. Who stated that Donne affects metaphysics? Who stated that John Donne affects metaphysics? As I said earlier, metaphysics is actually an important area where you have to prepare for your NDA UGC NET examination. So the question is, who stated that Donne affects metaphysics? And the options given here are John Dryden, Samuel Johnson, T.S. Eliot, and Alexander Pope. So here the confusion would be between Samuel Johnson and John Dryden, because Samuel Johnson was actually the writer who gave the credit, or who gave the title as Metaphysical School or Metaphysical School of Poets, while the term metaphysics was associated with Donne by John Dryden. So the statement Donne affects metaphysics was made by John Dryden. So John Dryden, we know about him. He was a prominent English poet, literary critic, a translator, a playwright. So you will be, if you are going to look through this generic division, you will be studying John Dryden in poetry, in fiction, in non-fiction, also in literary criticism, and also as a dramatist. So John Dryden, he was a prominent English poet, literary critic, translator, playwright of the 17th century, and he made this observation in his essay of dramatic poesy, where he discusses the various aspects of poetry and drama. So in this context, you can find that Dryden, he was referring to John Donne, and John Donne was also an influential English writer during that time. So Dryden's comment about Donne affecting this metaphysics is suggest about Donne's poetry often dwelled into the complex philosophical and intellectual themes, especially his use of conceits and also the metaphysical concepts. So John Donne's poetry, it is known for its intellectual depth, intricate imaginary exploitation of abstract ideas, etc., and also the using of these conceits, the extended metaphors, etc. And Dryden, he is basically acknowledging John Donne's penchant for metaphysics, and it highlights his significance as a poet who pushed the boundaries of poetic expression, or as a poet who brought this combination of emotion and intellect during this Renaissance and Baroque periods in English literature. Moving to the next question, how many times was Robert Frost awarded the Pulitzer Prize? Okay, how many times was Robert Frost awarded the Pulitzer Prize? This is actually important. You can also expect questions like, for which among the following work does Robert Frost was awarded the Pulitzer Prize? You will be given 3 options where you have to identify the work in which he has not won the Pulitzer Prize. So you can expect such questions from Robert Frost. So the correct answer is option 4. Correct answer is 4. Option C, 4. So these are his few Pulitzer Prize collections. The first one is New Hampshire. New Hampshire was published in 1924. So this collection, it includes some of Frost's most well-known poems like Stopping by the Woods, On a Snowy Evening, similarly Fire and the Ice. So the poems in New Hampshire, it reflects the deep connection of Frost to rural life, nature and human experience. So that is about New Hampshire. So remember the two most important poems of Robert Frost, that is Stopping by Woods on a Snowy Evening and also Fire and Ice, was published in New Hampshire. And the second one, Collected Poems, in 1931, it also won the Pulitzer Prize in the same year. So this Collected Poems, this is also a comprehensive collection of his poetry up to the time of 1931 with different wide range of themes and styles. And the most important poems that you can find in this Collected Poems 1931 is North of Boston. North of Boston is published in Collected Poems. Then Mountain Interval, it is also published in Collected Poems. And here you can find, here again, since he is a romantic poet, you can find the collections or his mastery of rural imagery, his reflections on the complexities of life, etc. Then you can find the third collection, Further Range, for which he won the Pulitzer Prize in 1937. Here also he continues to explore the themes of nature, identity, human condition, and the most important poems that you can find in A Further Range in 1937 is The Gift of the Outright. The Gift of the Outright was published in A Further Range. Then The Silken Tent. These are major two poems that you can find in the Further Range. So the next one is A Witness Tree in 1943, for which he won the Pulitzer Prize. So this collection, it has this works like Directive, then Neither Out Nor Far in the Deep. These are some of the poems that you can find in A Witness Tree. This also shows about his meditative or reflective style. So these are some of the important poems that you can find regarding Robert Frost and his collection. So his Pulitzer Prize winning collections, it includes New Hampshire 1924, Collected Poems 1931, A Further Range 1937, A Witness Tree 1943. So these are some of the collections that you can find. So the next question, in which poem of Milton does he label the poem as a monody in the epigram? So the options are El Allegro, Lycidas, Paradise Lost, and El Penizero. So here, before getting to the answer, just remember that there was once a question for NTA NET examination where you have to identify the companion poem. So just remember El Allegro and El Penizero, it's companion poem. Similarly, Paradise Regained, Samson Agonistes, they were published together. So just remember the works that are published together. So anyway, here, in which poem of Milton does he label the poem as a monody in the epigram? The correct answer is option B, Lycidas. So John Milton, he refers to Lycidas as a monody in the poem's epigram. So what do you mean by this monody? A monody is a poem lamenting on a person's death. Okay, so it was often performed by a single mourner. So we have discussed about Lycidas previously for its title. So we know that Lycidas is actually an elegy for the friend of John Milton, that was Edward the King. So here similarly, so that is why he refers it to as a monody. So Lycidas is a pastoral elegy written to mourn the death of Milton's friend Edward King, who drowned in a shipwreck. Okay, so here the poem, it blends classical and Christian themes, and through its pastoral form, Milton reflects on mortality, fame, and the poet's role. So since we have already discussed about Lycidas, I am not going further into it, but just remember that Lycidas, it is a monody as said by the John Milton, and monody is actually a poem lamenting on a person's death, often performed by a single mourner. Lycidas is a pastoral elegy written to mourn to Milton's death, that was Edward the King, who drowned in a shipwreck. And you can also find a blending of both classical and Christian themes in a pastoral form, where he discusses about the themes of mortality, fame, and the poet's role. Okay, so now let's move on to the next question. The critical essays of T.S. Eliot, The Sacred Woods, was first published in. The critical essays of T.S. Eliot, The Sacred Woods, was first published in. The correct answer is 1920. So the options given here are 1913, 1933, 1922 and 1920. So here 1915 was the first year in which Alfred J. Prufrock was published, and 1920 was the year in which his collection of essays. So The Sacred Woods, The Sacred Wood was actually a collection of 20 essays by T.S. Eliot. It was first published in 1920, and you can find different topics in which especially his criticism on Shakespeare's play Hamlet, about the poets Dante, about the poet William Blake. So these are all some of the essays that you can find in The Sacred Wood. And the most important prose work, Tradition and Individual Talent, it was originally published in two parts in the journal The Egoist, and it also came as a part of The Sacred Wood. And also the essay Philip Massinger, in which he speaks about the poet Philip's Messenger, which has got the famous line, immature poets imitate and mature poets steal. Immature poets imitate, mature poets steal. These all comes under this work, The Sacred Wood. So remember, The Sacred Wood, it is a collection of 20 essays by T.S. Eliot. It was first published in 1920, and the topics include the criticism on Hamlet, Dante, Blake, etc., the tradition and individual talent, Philip Messenger. All these essays comes under The Sacred Wood. So now moving to the next question, which among the following poet has the nickname High Priest of Nature? Which among the following poet has the nickname the High Priest of Nature? So the High Priest of Nature, we have the option Samuel Taylor Coleridge, Walter Scott, William Wordsworth and Thomas Hardy. So here the correct answer is William Wordsworth. And the name, the High Priest of Nature, was given to William Wordsworth by Matthew Arnold. So Matthew Arnold, he aptly described William Wordsworth as the High Priest of Nature. And the major reason is that William Wordsworth poetry, it often celebrates the natural world, where he emphasizes the role of nature in shaping human emotions, thoughts, experience, imagination. And also you can find throughout Wordsworth's career, his focus is on the nature as a source of inspiration and wisdom, and it also earned him an esteemed title among these literary critics and the scholars. So William Wordsworth was called as the High Priest of Nature by Matthew Arnold. So this nickname, it reflects Wordsworth's profound connection to nature, his poetic exploration of its beauty, power and spiritual significance. And we know that the preface written by him for Lyrical Ballads, which was published in 1800, was regarded to be the critical manifesto of this romantic period. So that all gave him the title High Priest of Nature. Now let's look at the next question. Which poet won the Nobel Prize in 1971? Which poet won the Nobel Prize in 1971? So the options are Pablo Neruda, Derek Walcott, Patrick White and Saul Bellow. So we have already discussed about W.B. Yeats and about his Nobel Prize. So which poet won the Nobel Prize in 1971? The correct answer is Pablo Neruda. Okay, so the correct answer is Pablo Neruda. So Pablo Neruda, he is often considered to be the national poet of Chile, and his works have been popular and influential worldwide. So just look at all the poems published by him. You can expect the questions like match the following, etc. So about Pablo Neruda, he is a Chilean poet, diplomat and a politician who won the Nobel Prize in Literature in 1971. And Neruda, he became a poet at the age of 13, where he wrote under different styles, including surrealist poem, historical epics, political manifestos, prose, autobiography and passionate love poems. And his most important collection of poem is 20 Love Poems and a Song of Despair. 20 Love Poems and a Song of Despair, which was published in the year 1924. So 20 Love Poems and a Song of Despair, published in the year 1924. So next question, who is called as the Poet Laureate of Vermont? Who is called as the Poet Laureate of Vermont? So we have the options Sylvia Plath, Walt Whitman, Robert Frost and Mark Twain. Sylvia Plath, Walt Whitman, Robert Frost and Mark Twain. So the correct answer is Robert Frost. Okay, so the Poet Laureate of Vermont, that is Robert Frost. So about Robert Frost, he is renowned for his poetry's rural imagery, philosophical depth in a modern age and in a modern postmodern age. While he was actually a person who brought this romantic or transcendentalist ideas, not just ideas but the style of writing to with a modern mix to this modern and postmodern age. And his he spent the significant part of his life in Vermont, and that was the inspiration for most of his iconic works. That is why he is known to be the Poet Laureate of Vermont. So many of Robert Frost's poems reflects his experiences and observations in Vermont. So his poems, it often explores the themes like nature, rural life, human relationship, the complexities of existence. And also you can say that the poems that are deeply connected to Vermont include The Route Not Taken. The Route Not Taken has got high features of this Vermont. Similarly, Stopping by Woods on a Snowy Evening, The Melting Wall, these are all connected to Vermont. So his connection to the state and his contributions to American literature led to him being recognized as Vermont's poet laureate. So now coming to the next question. Who coined the phrase metaphysical school for describing the poetry of Donne and his followers? Who coined the phrase metaphysical school for describing the poetry of John Donne and his followers? So the correct answer, the options are Samuel Johnson, John Dryden, T.S. Eliot and John Webster. So here these three writers, Samuel Johnson, John Dryden, T.S. Eliot, these three writers have mentioned about metaphysical poets, while Dryden said that it was Donne who affects the metaphysics, and it was Samuel Johnson who coined the phrase metaphysical school. Okay, so the correct answer is Samuel Johnson. So Johnson, he used the term metaphysical school in his work Lives of the Most Eminent English Poets, which was published from 1779 to 1781, to categorize a group of poets known for their intellectual and philosophical style. So the metaphysical poets here include John Donne, George Herbert, Andrew Marvell, and they are all known for the use of the wit, complex metaphors, that is conceits, the abstract ideas, the mixing up of intellect and emotion. So it was Samuel Johnson who characterized or who categorized all these writers under the title the metaphysical school of poetry. Moving to the next question. Who published the very influential book of poetry, The Journals of Susanna Moodie? Okay, who published the very influential book of poetry, The Journals of Susanna Moodie in 1970. So here the options are Margaret Atwood, Derek Walcott, Judith Wright and Pablo Neruda. Margaret Atwood, Derek Walcott, Judith Wright and Pablo Neruda. This actually comes under post-colonial literature because the correct answer is Margaret Atwood. Okay, so about Margaret Atwood, she is a Canadian poet, a novelist, a literary critic, essayist, a teacher, environmental activist and also an inventor. And since 1961, she has published almost 18 books of poetry. She has published 18 novels, 11 books of non-fiction, 9 collections of short fiction, 8 children's books, 2 graphic novels and also many small press editions. So here you can find that she has got a large number of literary contributions under her name, and her best known work is her novel The Handmaid's Tale. Okay, I'm just mentioning here because I just want you to remember that the most important, the significant work of Margaret Atwood is her novel, a dystopian novel, The Handmaid's Tale, which was published in the year 1985. And she has also won numerous awards, numerous honors for her works, including 2 Booker Prize. Okay, she has also won 2 Booker Prize. So in this book about about Moodie, here you can find that in this book, Atwood adopts the voice of Susanna Moodie, okay, a noted early Canadian writer, and attempts to imagine and convey her feelings about the life of Canada in that particular era. So this book, it separates into 3 separate journals which cover her arrival in 1832 to a post-death narration ending in 1961. So 3 journals. Journal 1 is from 1832 to 1840, Journal 2 from 1841 to 1870, and 3 continues on until 1869, wherein a dead Susanna Moodie comments on a 20th century Canada. Okay, so that is about this Susanna Moodie's work written by Margaret Atwood. So remember all these details. So moving on to the next question. Essay on Shelley is the only prose work written by. Essay on Shelley is the only prose work written by. The options are Thomas De Quincey, Thomas Love Peacock, Mary Shelley and Robert Browning. Thomas De Quincey, Thomas Love Peacock, Mary Shelley and Robert Browning. Thomas De Quincey, okay, so here the correct answer is Robert Browning. Essay on Shelley is the only prose work written by Robert Browning. So, Robert Browning, he is primarily known for his poetry, and he wrote only one significant prose work, that is Essay on Shelley. So, this essay was written as an introduction to the 1839 collection of Percy Bysshe Shelley's work. So, in this particular work, he explored Shelley's life, his character, his poetic achievements, about the critical insights and appreciation of Shelley's contribution to literature. So remember about this Victorian poets and romantic writers. Look at the plays, the essays written by him, because that is not the primary area. This is regarded to be the minor work. So such works have got high significance when it comes to NDA NET examination. So go for it. So here Browning, he was commissioned to write an introduction for the posthumous edition of Shelley's work. So this essay, it was intended to provide reader with a deeper understanding of Shelley's life posthumously. And here you can find Browning's admiration of Shelley, because Browning, he admired Shelley very deeply, both for his poetic genius and also for his revolutionary ideas. So the essay, it reflects Browning's reverence for Shelley, considering him or portraying him to be a revolutionary figure, because you can find that Shelley, the major themes revolving around him was being a prophet for this revolution, rebellion, etc. So according to Browning, Browning regards Shelley to be a visionary poet who transcends the conventional boundaries of poetry. And also you can find a character analysis, because here you can find that Browning, he dwells deeply into Shelley's personality, about his idealism, about his pursuit of truth, about how he was misunderstood by his contemporaries, etc. Then he also speaks about Shelley's unique poetic vision, about his themes of love, nature, human freedom, about the lyrical language used by him, etc. So that is one major feature that you can find in Robert Browning's the essay on Shelley. Okay, I have expressed I have given a detailed view about this essay on Shelley, because you can expect questions from assertion reason, because this is a minor work, and you have to have an idea about what the essay is. So now moving to the next question. So this is actually a concluding line of the poem. So in the beginning of this video, we have discussed about an opening line of Ode to a Nightingale. So this is about this concluding poem. You start to hum several hundred years ago. This could have been mysticism or heresy. It isn't now. Outside there are sirens. Someone's been run over. The century grinds on. This lines conclude the poem In the Secular Night. Okay, so this is actually a concluding poem of In the Secular Night. So, In the Secular Night, it explores the themes of modernity, isolation, loss of spirituality, etc. So, this is actually a poem written by Margaret Atwood. So, this poem, it uses very vivid, stark imagery to depict the contrast between the quiet, reflective hum, that is mostly like a contemplation or a prayer, and the harsh reality of the modern world. So these are the two contrasts that is brought in the Secular Night. So here the modern world, it is indicated by this, what can we say, the sirens or someone being run over, etc. And the tone is somewhat reflexive, melancholic, illustrating a sense of disconnection between the past mystical or spiritual beliefs, and also highlighting the indifferent passage of time in the modern era. So in the Secular Night, it explores themes of modernity, isolation, and the loss of spirituality. Atwood contrasts the past, where certain actions might have been seen as mystical or heretical, with the present, where such notions have lost their significance amidst the noise and chaos of this contemporary life. Okay, moving to the final question. The famous line, beauty is truth, truth beauty appears in. The famous line, beauty is truth, truth beauty. It's actually a very famous line which appears in Ode on a Grecian Urn. So, Ode on a Grecian Urn, this is one of the greatest odes of 1890, which also include Ode on Indolence, Ode on Melancholy, Ode to a Nightingale, Ode to a Psyche, Ode on a Grecian Urn. So, these five are the greatest odes of 1890. So, in the 5 stanzas of 10 lines each, the poet addresses an ancient Greek urn Thou still unravished bride of quietness, thou foster child of silence and slow time. That is how he begins this poem. In a particular, he reflects upon two scenes, one in which a lover pursues his beloved, and other were villagers and a priest gathered to perform a sacrifice. So both these explores the idealized or the immortality of art. Okay, where his life is almost at the what at the end of its career path. So you can find many phrases. So just read the poem. It's one of the most beautiful poem ever written in English literature. So just go through these lines, pick out the important lines, just look at the explanation. Okay, so these are the 25 questions. So that's all about this video. So once again I'm repeating, in this video we have discussed 25 questions which are related to poetry. So these are useful on two grounds. One is that after you have studied British literature, American, post-colonial, European, this will be like a revision for you regarding poetry. And the second ground is that you will be given a clear-cut idea about the poetry and the different types of questions that you can expect from poetry. So that's all about this video. Thank you.